13,000 Escapes. A dossier against the project of 13,000 places. Preamble. That the world appears this way, as it is, should be enough for its disgrace. When Dante wrote Inferno, he didn't additionally demand that they enact its reform. Serge Coutel, L'Involé. Starting more than 20 years ago, a growing number of prisoners no longer accept sanctions. Just as they reject the rules of the social game outside the walls, on the inside they refuse penance and punishment which, for nearly 2 centuries, have constituted prison morality that has the aim of keeping them under submission. Today, the prisoners of democracy are not only clearly contesting the prison policies of whatever government, but are openly challenging the principle of imprisonment itself. To confront this unprecedented wave of opposition, the judicial administration has implemented a program of prison renewal and modernization that is also without precedent. Until the revolts of 1971, the management of French prisons was still rigid. The prison administration managed to act in such a way that revolts stirred up by a few prisoners would remain isolated, or at least would not be spoken about on the outside as anything other than curiosities. The explosions of 1971 and 1974, which involved the entire prison system, created a new situation. The force of the uprisings and the violence of the repression were a shock to society. The prison administration was forced to make some concessions and reform a system of internal regulations that had remained unchanged for decades. Since then, prisoners have not stopped attacking prison authorities. While separation and atomization have become dominant conditions, places where a collective critique can be practically elaborated are rare. Paradoxically, prison is still one of those places. Unlike what happens in most cases outside the walls, where misfortune is experienced in a solitary way and often constitutes a disarming of the individual, the experience of bad luck that prisoners share is a weapon against isolation and prison silence. The experience of being able to have an immediate collective resonance, in spite of the administrative will to confine everyone in a merely personal condition, generates a dangerous cohesion. The endless collective revolts that have shaken the prison since 1985, and the networks of solidarity that have formed since then, bear witness to this. Despite devastating treatments and additional years of imprisonment, rebellion comes around periodically to inflame the prisons. The necessity of freedom manifests itself in this without ambiguity. Using proven techniques and strategies, the sinister 13,000 program is above all a response to the situation of endemic revolt inside the walls. The state is restructuring the industrial apparatus and at the same time, in a similar manner, it is building new conception prisons, closing down some old prisons and renovating others. Outdated, crumbling prisons from which people have escaped are replaced, just as the high-rises of the proletarian neighborhoods where people were rebelling 10 years ago are being blown up. To tame the insubordination of the populations that have been dumped there, the large complexes of the suburbs have been renovated using police criteria and repainted in the colors of the times. In the midst of the misery itself, the attributes of every advanced society are discovered: the police and the democratic lie. With the new conception prisons, repressive modernity arrives and is introduced inside the walls. The proclaimed goal, humanization, healthiness, decongestion of overcrowded buildings, in reality hides the desire to put these places on the same level as the social order. There's a footnote here. The judicial administration must really be short of imagination to think of such a trifle. More prisons will be built, more people will be locked up. You can even find this banality in the mouths of prison wardens. Overcrowding involves a frightening promiscuity that is added to the usual reasons for revolt. Rationally, subdividing prisoners, the judicial administration pretends, as long as it doesn't miss a chance to trumpet everywhere, to do wholesome work, but in this case, the operation complies with considerations for keeping order more than with any humanitarian inclinations. The vacant spaces are destined to find their tenants, now and in the future. It's as if the administration demanded oversized accommodations in order to cope with future overcrowding. Their inadequacy to this order condemns the old structures. The prison doors are open to the outside world in order to let the civilizing principle of our time penetrate into them. Technically equipped separation. For a long time, pure repression was the only recourse of authority for overcoming revolt. Now it must avert revolt at its source, suffocating it even in thought. The responsibility for carrying out the task of constraining individuals to not merely respect, but to espouse social rules, lies increasingly in reformist measures. Reform is the continuation of repression by other means. It increases the efficacy of social control. This concern is at the center of the conception of the new prisons. For the first time in the 20th century, the prison administration possesses a new, more adequate tool to apply the strategy of its choice on a large scale, rather than responding blow for blow. Up to now, it has been limited to backpedaling by liberalizing the prison regime bit by bit. Now, the 13,000 cells form a margin of maneuvering that will allow prisoners as a whole to be better managed. We can imagine the frantic use that judges will make of this surplus of cells, following from the general policy of mostly systematic incarceration. Let's not forget that 100,000 prison sentences without the possibility of parole are meted out each year. The extension of the means that were studied for quickly containing any uprising or collective unrest, if they cannot be prevented, has reached the point where it is claimed that even the idea of escape will be crushed. Footnote. The repugnant demagogy about this consists in boring us with the so-called lax conditions of imprisonment that favor repeated escapes. Unfortunately, the reality is something else entirely. The escape rate is 0.08% per year, for an average of about 40 prisoners from a total of 48,000. In passing, we salute the 60 escaped prisoners who recently thumbed their noses at the guards. The prison administration has profited from studies inside its institutions, notably those which were carried out during the Badinter period. Huge prisons like Luz-le-Lille, the Baumettes, Fleury, etc., are often the first to rise up. The tension that reigns in these places and the high number of prisoners show how the problem of overpopulation is ultimately just a question of the relationships of force. Thus, it is a matter of systematically isolating prisoners from each other. The architectural conception of the new institutions is regulated by this imperative. Prisons of moderate dimensions, with fragmentation and the division of spaces as their essential principles. Starting from small detention units for 25 people, locked up in individual cells, possible paths were obsessively distinguished with constant attention to separation. We cite as an example the stairways reserved exclusively for prison guards. Furthermore, the modular structure renders the different sectors of confinement watertight. For example, the movies and the social educational sectors that place on the same floor of the same building cannot under any circumstance intercommunicate. Electronically controlled interblocked entrances manage and regulate every movement, whether horizontal or vertical. Along with access control that allows surveillance over the smallest movement, there are also electronic motion detectors in the main passageways. Put in operation during the night, they can tell immediately if anyone goes past them, making an alarm go off. On the outside, the path of the round is watched over by surveillance cameras and, along with the height of the wall, over 20 feet, and the observation towers, there is also a so-called detection grid that sets off the alarms the moment it is touched, automatically activating surveillance cameras in the sector. The number of courtyards for walks has been increased to reduce the number of prisoners brought together in one of the moments that is most favorable to collective action. The devices for preventing potential rebels from taking over spaces in the prison structure have been improved and, above all, systematized in comparison with most existing prisons. Every attempt at revolt has to take these obstacles to its extension into account. We are confident that the rage and wits of the rebels will know how to figure this out. In this setting of reinforced security, the prison administration plans to occupy the prisoners' time. Educational pseudo-activity will be widely distributed. This dismal little animation is above all intended to present an image of the new prisons that is a bit more respectable than the image of a high-tech tomb. On the other hand, authentic little industrial sites are installed in these prison structures, which are themselves often located in the neighborhood of genuine industrial zones. Everything leaves us to think that it is not merely bricolage, but rather that there will be large-scale exploitation of prison labor. Some private firms have been associated with the management of these places through contracts. These firms artificially lower their construction costs with the aim of attracting the market. They intend to make up for this from now on through the exploitation of prison institutions, which is to say, off the sweat of prisoners. They are entrusted with the shelter arrangements, as these rotten shits dare to call it, the laundry, the cafeteria, the sanitary services, and of course, the work and education of the prisoners. This is how the Judiciary Administration intends to financially rationalize the prisons, without neglecting to integrate an economic series into its preliminary studies, dealing with the materials and personnel. In practice, the resistance of certain materials and devices can vary according to the sectors in which they are placed. The technical innovations and the introduction of private personnel would limit the staff and the prerogatives of the jailers. Outside the chatter of publicity, the concern with making structures with the appearance of high-tech enterprises, which are economic and perfectly controlled at the same time, is clearly visible. Perhaps this is the true nature of what the Judiciary Administration sees as the opening of prisons onto the world. The assumption of individual responsibility that is constantly invoked in order to force individuals to bow down before the rationality of work is also used to subjugate prisoners to the rationality of prisons and induce them to participate in the administration of their own imprisonment. The prison administration already has an arsenal of coercive measures at its disposal for individualizing the duration of the punishment: favors and conditions granted on the basis of merit, the internal prison tribunal, solitary confinement and punishment cells, suppression of visits and activities, etc. Modernization reinforces and extends the field of sordid calculations that is intended to subjugate prisoners. In these new pulping factories, the damage and acts of vandalism that were committed relatively anonymously in the old prisons can be immediately located. Everything has been provided for identifying and directly punishing the perpetrators. One of the most widespread activities, blowing the fuses of an entire wing, will be located from now on, thanks to the fuse box each cell is supplied with. Since toilet pipes were sometimes plugged to flood a floor, siphons have been installed in appropriate pipes under every cell, allowing the perpetrator of such a natural revenge to be immediately identified. Here is an additional application of the individualized control, which shows its value completely when one considers that, in many instances, the prison administration no longer holds the means for strictly applying the despicable internal regulations. These sterile prisons give them the possibility to do so. The new-look penitentiaries have been adapted to the needs of the end of the century. We are obliged to note a paradox. Now it is prisons that resemble factories. Not only does the layout of the places impose rules of functioning adapted to the new techniques of work organization, but everything is thought out in minute detail in order to hinder, if not prohibit, all potential collusion. A sophisticated electronic system that encloses the prisoner in a fixed network of surveillance monitors her every move, at times relaying it through a system of magnetic encodings. One would think he was in the Forum des Halles, or the main office of the defense. Curiously, these techniques are tested out in the sphere of work, and then made common pretty much everywhere else before being imported into the prison universe. But if the managers have integrated this constriction to the point that it becomes rewarding, prisoners, like subjugated workers, immediately feel its completely oppressive character. These techniques are the primary instrument for smoothing the explosive relations between guards and prisoners with the aim of making them as impersonal as possible. At the same time that the functioning of the buildings is dedicated to eliminating points of friction, it sends every prisoner into a depersonalized environment. Consequently, oppression becomes more abstract. Besides, the point is not so much to mete out an iron discipline to an undifferentiated mass of prisoners as to manage the smallest details of their incarceration. The repressive method cannot disappear. It forms the intrinsic backdrop of the prison universe. But it tends to dress itself up in a cold, impersonal management that characterizes our times so well. The construction of new prisons arrives just in time to strengthen the arm of a justice system that laments the poverty of its means. The judicial institution also functions by value of example that must not allow exceptions if it is to be effective. This is what produces the omnipotence of the law. Thus, there are cells reserved specifically for the handicapped, entire wings for drug addicts, so that no one escapes incarceration. It is understood how many and which possibilities for confinement the antiseptic design of these mortuaries can provide for the judges. Footnote. Contrary to what they would like us to believe, the little judges who have protested against the self-amnesties of political people with one or two provisional releases have not done this to challenge an injustice, but to protect and defend their independence and their prerogative to decide on the freedom of others. The dry administrative decision to release Nakachin did not fail to openly oppose the more elementary hope of prisoners, that of getting out. Their rage mounted. Their mobilization before the quick treatment of the Nakachin affair directly represented a reaction without frills against an obvious dirty trick. Only for us, no freedom in sight. Generally, no one should escape the omnipotence of this world. While society has confined every human prospect to the logic of money, with no conceivable elsewhere, The modern prison necessarily appears as a hermetic universe without any way out. Everywhere, triumphant capitalism lends credit to the idea of an inescapable world. Within these walls, the same feeling of fatality must reign relentlessly. The new fortresses are built to notify everyone of this meager alternative. Either submit to the dictates of forced inclusion or put up with the rigors of exclusion. Thanks to a profusion of technological means which it is impossible to evade, thanks to wings in which all contacts with others and the surrounding environment is almost impossible. The principle of isolation and disciplinary units has been reinforced so the prison administration will be able to use the 22 new units at their pleasure for getting rid of refractory prisoners. Everything has been thought out so that prisoners can see neither what is immediately outside nor the rest of the prison, but also so nothing filters in that they can hear. These units are generally located on the highest floor of the building, with exercise yards enclosed in grillwork assigned to them. The high transom windows in the cells don't allow for any view. These prisons have nothing to envy in their bigger sisters, American maximum security prisons. The muscular caprice of the guards is combined with antiseptic terror. The planners of this project conceived it with a subtlety dedicated to doing away with the idea of any outlets other than sports, tranquilizers, study, and work. This has the aim of limiting the prisoner's mental universe, increasing isolation and the loss of any reference even more, standardizing the detention of prisoners awaiting trial to the criteria of maximum security prisons reserved for those already sentenced. This is a much vaunted concern for humanization. The high walls in the heart of the city were erected as a warning, a call to order, but sometimes allowed curiosity and support from passers-by in the instances of unrest. Now, prison power manifests itself far away from any friendly voices, without witnesses, outside the city walls. This entire technological arsenal did not prevent the Villeneuve, Tarascon, Neuvic, and Saint-Mihiel prisons from experiencing protest movements in the weeks after they first started to operate, before they were even completely full. Despite the mechanisms deployed to prevent access to the roofs, the insurgent prisoners still climbed up there. The prisoners immediately expressed their rage against the most modern conditions of their incarceration, monitoring with electronic cards, individual cells, the increase in prices and the rationing that result from the privatization of meal distribution and the canteen. It is really no more humane to be alone in a cell than to be crowded into one. The silence to which many people in society have resigned themselves makes the dignity of unsubmissive prisoners stand out even more. Despite the risks, they have known how to make themselves heard with enough force to cause concern among those who rule by blows and contempt. Every time they carry out a dish strike or refuse to return to their cells after exercise periods, every time equipment is smashed up, every time there is an uprising, the demands that they make are the same: the elimination of isolation, punishment cells, and internal prison tribunals, the automatic granting of parole, prison leave passes, and the application of conditional liberty, minimum wage for prisoners who work, places reserved for intimate visits, amnesty for all sanctioned and sentenced rebels. We want to render them the homage that they deserve by making known the plans and technical documentation about some of the new prisons that they are at risk of being transferred to. And we haven't neglected the possibility of causing these documents to reach the prisoners through appropriate means. We salute the spirit of revolt that animates them. Trop de temps pour réfléchir, paraît qu'avant d'en parler, mieux à faire c'était d'agir. L'embrouille de chaque côté.